Bitcoin as the native currency of the internet makes sense because it is the biggest, the most broadly used globally. It's going to define the future. In my view, Bitcoin and Lightning will be the rails of autonomous agents. The more proliferated that becomes, the more prevalent, accepting and normalized it becomes, it will then stimulate the other side of the market. If people then see that you can spend Bitcoin, they may well be ready to see it, to spend it and buy it and hold it. Bitcoin is our gunpowder. Our entire strategy here is just deploy the infrastructure, get people more used to it, get people comfortable with it, and then when the time comes, we're there. We can catch them, we can help.
Welcome to Medium of Exchange, the podcast that spotlights business owners building on a Bitcoin standard. Today's guest is David Parkinson, founder and CEO of Musket, a Bitcoin payments company that is building the infrastructure that makes Bitcoin usable everyday money. While much of the space focuses on price and speculation, David is focused on something harder, payments that actually work, and letting merchants accept Bitcoin and credit cards all in the same flow. So today we're going to be talking about Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and the realities of building payment infrastructure and why practical usability really matters. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Was there a painful moment where you put your hands up in the air and you said, that's it, we have to fix this, I'm building Musket?
Yeah, there is. And there's well teed up because there's a very long and meandering backstory to that as well. So you can have a coffee whilst I take the reins for the next 25 minutes. So my background, for anyone that hasn't heard me before, is a mix of telecommunications. So I've spent a couple of years in low latency trading and algorithmic technologies in London, 2006 and 7. I then spent about 10 years in management consultancy, Ernst & Young, PwC, that kind of thing. And then 7 years in the strategy team at Sky, or your users might know, or listeners might know that as Comcast, streaming TV businesses, launching across Europe, in Ireland, Germany, Austria, that kind of thing. It was whilst I was at PwC in 2014 that I stumbled into Bitcoin, and I was working for Boris Johnson when he was the mayor of London. I was given a Doge type project and said, look, here's £1 billion worth of public spend. Take 100 million out and save the taxpayers some money. So that was the challenge. I did that with the team. The side project they asked me was, could we pay civil engineering contracts in Bitcoin? And I didn't really know much about Bitcoin at that time. A little bit, I'd read a little bit about it, but I asked why, and they said, well, and this was one chap in the Transport for London who runs all of the underground train network, and he said, look, we want a tighter control over our supply chain. We want to trace where the payments are going. We want to make sure that we're getting value for money in the procurement activity, and public funds are being used well. And we think if we mandate payment in Bitcoin and we are the exchange of redemption at the end, then we can see along that train where the funds have gone, how much margin has been applied, and whether it's a good use and they've done exactly what they said they were going to do. So interesting project. It didn't really go anywhere at the end. It was just almost a research piece. I was hooked. I was completely obsessed at that point. The more, as you do with Bitcoin, the more I learned about how it works. And then I started reading around the internet and trying to find some relative, insightful information sources. And the FT and the Economist had viewpoints, and just it wasn't good enough. So you end up in dark forums, or also dark rabbit holes on bizarre forums where you just get more information than you otherwise would from the traditional media. So it was at that point I started spending a few years then really understanding Bitcoin. It took me, life got in the way, I say life, marriage, kids, that kind of things, moving house a couple of times. Life was busy. So I didn't really fully go into Bitcoin because I just had other stuff on, and it didn't strike me just how important it was at that point. So about 2 or 3 years later, 2017, we had that really aggressive run up, and then this whole ecosystem of digital assets sprouted out. I was like, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to look into it. And I put all my knowledge together at that point. And about a year later, then I just had all this information in my head. I was like, well, I've got no one to talk to. I try and talk to friends and family about this. They don't care. They think I'm a complete lunatic. I'm talking to them about the problems of central banking and changing the world. And so I just had to find an outlet. So myself and a co-founder set up a training course. We wanted to orange pill as many people as we could. And we did it through the lens of talking about the history of economics, the history of the world to an extent, different forms of money, different economic theories, and then how Bitcoin fits in. So it was giving people a framework on how to think about it. And at the end, that's like 6 hours of a day. So we would invite venture capital firms, accountants, lawyers, anyone in finance typically. Every 6 weeks, about 20 people, 30 people in a room. And at the end of every session, we'd always ask if there was any questions, and they would always say, someone guaranteed would always say, look, you've just spent all day telling us why Bitcoin is money, but I can't spend it anywhere. I can't buy a coffee with it. I can't buy a sandwich with it. And that one, I don't know whether you've ever seen the meme on the internet of a sort of medieval knight in armor, and there's a tiny little sort of gap in his eyes, and he's really well defended. And it's sort of me saying Bitcoin is money for 6 hours, and there's a single arrow going straight through the armor saying, but I can't spend it anywhere. It was just that one killer line, and it just ate away at me for a year. And then COVID hit. We said, look, I think let's pause, let's go and take this opportunity to actually do the research about the products that are out there. Let's use our experience, our background, our network, our capability. Let's just build what we think the world needs. So this came about as, we do see Bitcoin as freedom money. I refuse to accept that it is only a store of value. I just don't think that's a particularly interesting outcome for Bitcoin. I think the most important outcome is that it's freedom money for humans. And I think the most likely outcome is that it's also native internet money for autonomous agents. And we're starting to see the sort of the foundations of that start now. So the challenge then was to find the team, find the right people, build the right proposition, and get the MVP together, get that into market, get some funding, and start really turning it from an idea into, first of all, world-class engineered Bitcoin product, but then a commercially viable end-to-end solution at the end. We've achieved a lot of that, but we're on the journey of scaling, and we're in our growth phase at the moment. So, long-winded way of saying we wanted to address medium of exchange because people didn't believe me when I told them for 6 hours that it was.
Okay, so you're putting all this time and energy into helping people understand what is Bitcoin, how does it work, and then this arrow goes straight through the armor, right into your eye. And I mean, what did that feel like when they're hitting you with this question? Was it right off the bat? You're like, I got to build this, or did some time go by? Or
it ate away because I would then sort of go back and lick my wounds and say, right, they're not wrong. I refuse to accept that they are right, but therein lies the opportunity. Let's have a look at the products that were out there. And, at that time, we were in a really high fee on-chain environment. Lightning hadn't really been established, and it wasn't prevalent at that point. So it was still a little bit too early for me to address the problem. And I think timing worked quite well in our favor on the basis that Lightning then started to become a lot more scalable and secure. And I think, I saw a couple of products launch that worked, that were good, but there was such a high degree of friction at the same time. So even if you onboard a merchant to accept Bitcoin, they still need a parallel device. They've got their primary PDQ machine, and then they have the Bitcoin machine, or it's on the phone of the entrepreneur or the business owner typically. And then you've got parallel reporting and accounting, and then you've got to deal with the tax and any divestment of capital gain in various jurisdictions. So there was all kinds of friction points that these great solutions just weren't able to fix. And at the same time, the big operators in the world, the traditional acquirers, they were looking at digital assets, but they just weren't interested. And they certainly wouldn't have approached it through the right Austrian economics lens of saying, this is why Bitcoin matters. This is why we're going to add it as an alternative payment method. And by the way, it's also the best form of money that you can also then use as collateral, as an incentive mechanism and a reward mechanism and payroll and tips and other things. So, I think you're right. It wasn't this one moment. It was just a a chip away over time at each of these sessions, and a gradual maturing of Lightning, the end of COVID, and a better environment to network and meet people in person, which is where I met my CTO, Ben DeWall. Things came together, and I think it was just a vision. We wanted to do something. We wanted to address Bitcoin as money, and then a refusal to accept that the world would take care of it, and we didn't need to do anything. We said, no, let's take action. Let's do something, and let's build what we think is missing.
I love that. So many companies, so many great companies are built on that refusal to accept premise, right? I've had so many conversations with merchants because I've been in the payment space the last 16 years, and I've onboarded thousands of merchants to, point of sale systems and credit card, ACH and all that. We've got this chicken and the egg problem, right? Consumers want to spend Bitcoin, but they can't. Some of them want to spend Bitcoin, but they can't because merchants don't accept it. And merchants don't accept it because consumers, but I think the fundamental problem is merchants. So the tools aren't there. You're building the tools. You're literally building the tools. For a merchant, if you're a small business owner, medium-sized business owner, Austrian economics, big picture stuff sounds great. But at the end of the day, I run a business, and it's got to be efficient. And my bookkeeper and my accountant and my staff and my everyone has to work. And so you've got it all integrated. I want to learn more. So you've got a credit card terminal. Is it like a traditional? Is it a PAX terminal? What kind of terminal is this?
So this is our terminal. So this is a Verifone terminal.
It's a Verifone terminal.
Yeah, so we've just secured a global partnership with Verifone. So they are effectively our exclusive partner on hardware. So we're going to be working with Verifone for the terminals, and that's not just that single terminal. It's a range of terminals. So every merchant has got different requirements, unattended for things like car parks or for vending machines. And then you have your card present terminal there. There's also the EPOS. So if you think about, if I step back and what is it that Musket offers, we have the card present solution. So that's card present is when the card has to be physically present. We can sell that as a standalone device, which includes cards and Bitcoin, or we can bundle that together with our EPOS solution. So we have a full stack EPOS solution, which is all of your stock management, inventory management, product catalog, menu setup. We can do product pairings and offers, discounts, loyalty and reward schemes, staff management, booking, compliance, whatever a hospitality business needs to run, we have that in-house. So for us, what we're doing is we're not going into a merchant and talking about adding an app to a device or giving you an extra device. We're saying we want your whole payment stack. Okay, so it's the whole thing. It's not just one thing. And then the third piece, the third sort of pillar is the e-commerce. Most in the wake of COVID, what we saw with a lot of hospitality venues is they installed QR codes on tables. And quite often now, I don't really love the experience, but it's there and it's out in the wild now. But you go and scan the QR code, get the menu, order, and your food, drinks, whatever it is, gets delivered to the table. But you've already checked out via the online gateway. Now, again, most people use Stripe, Adyen, WorldPay, or something like that in their gateway. And it was important for us to have that capability so that we can go to a merchant and say, look, you're using 5 different suppliers for terminals, EPOS, for QR codes, for online gateway, for staff management. Aggregate it all together. We can give you a single price, typically saving around about 30% against all of that, and deliver significant value. The beauty then is they've got one number and one person to deal with, one supplier to deal with. The beauty for us is we get to meet them where they are today. We don't have to spend so much time telling them how great Bitcoin is and it's going to take over the world. We can if they're interested. It's there. Our entire approach is for this to be a Trojan horse. We want to be one of the best payments businesses on the planet so that you choose us because of our value-added capabilities, because our EPOS is better than everyone else, because of the AI and analytics. We've just done a deep integration with Google Gemini. I know a lot of Bitcoiners don't love Google because of, I guess, privacy and other things, but we have to build world-leading software at the same time. And the browser that the system that the EPOS runs on, Chrome OS, a lot more stable than other systems. Gemini gives incredible rich insights into the profit margins per item. It gives us insights and links, weather patterns and staff availability. Jason was working on Saturday. No one likes Jason. We sold 50% less coffee because everyone saw that Jason was working. That sort of thing. The insights that it gives a consumer really powerful. And where we want to take that is then the fully end-to-end connected supply chains, looking down the start of this agentic commerce piece. And, we've seen both Anthropic, OpenAI, and we've seen Gemini or Google do something similar in that space. The ability for us, we would love to move into the space where we have an EPOS that has an agent that is capable of taking care of all inventory, stock control, delivery, purchasing decisions. So that as a business owner, you have to make sure that you're running and you set the parameters upon running the business up, but you don't need to pay 2 or 3 members of staff to do that. So in an environment where hospitality cost and margins are under pressure, we're looking at our toolkit and going to market saying, look, you're not just buying Musket here, you're not just adding Bitcoin. You're experiencing a much better operational efficiency as a result. And that could well be the difference between someone being profitable and not. So that's sort of our approach, and we take that to market. The device here is now finally booted up. So you have, on the main screen there, you have pay with Bitcoin, pay with card. I don't know if you can see it just because of the, so it's super easy. You just hit pay with Bitcoin and I'll charge you 1 penny there. If you've got a Lightning wallet, there you go. So it just comes up and you can scan that and pay. I've been out to merchants before, in the early days we were testing this, and you go into a merchant, you've probably got some more stories as well to tell, but you go into a merchant site and you've talked to them about payments. I've been told literally to fuck off. Mm-hmm. It's get out, never come back. No. But if you go in and talk to them about Bitcoin, whether it's a cold call or it's a physical face-to-face conversation, you say, look, just wondering who you have as your Bitcoin provider. They then at least engage you in a conversation. So it takes all the acidity out of a cold call or a sale. So for us, yes, Bitcoin is exactly what we need to see in the world. We want to proliferate and accelerate the adoption. I'd say 95% of our revenue comes from basis points on Visa, Mastercard, and Amex charges rather than Bitcoin. So as ideological and as philosophical and passionate as I am about Bitcoin, I think we've had this conversation internally with the whole team that we just have to leave this ideology and our ego at the door, because the world isn't completely ready yet for Bitcoin. It's getting better and it's increasing and it's improving, but the approach that we take is only by leading with Bitcoin and making it a central point of our proposition, but by demonstrating to the world that they should choose Musket because we've got the best payments business on the planet, not because we do Bitcoin. That's the way to approach it. And so far it's working quite well. And as I say, it takes that acidity out of the conversation at the beginning, because everyone's already got a payment provider. It's the conversation about what are your rates? Are your rates cheaper? What's your monthly rental on the terminal device, et cetera, et cetera. So as long as we can stay even or deliver value and ideally a lower cost structure on a total cost of ownership basis on the things that they have in their head, which is your card rates and your machine equipment hire, then we can have a conversation about who they use for EPOS and all the other capabilities. And maybe then by the end, we say, oh, by the way, have you considered accepting Bitcoin? Because that comes as standard. And here are the reasons why you should and the benefits that you get. It tends to work well. And we're winning. People like something new, something different. And it's an ability to differentiate from the competition. And, again, people use it for different purposes. Some of our customers say, look, we take Bitcoin, we just hold it, and then we use it for our staff bonus at the end of the year, or maybe a Christmas party or some other reason. We're in the early days of scaling, approaching somewhere between 50 and 100 million. So it depends when this airs, but we should be approaching 100 million of volume on the platform, but we should be hitting about 1 billion by the end of this year. And should have about 3,000 customers or 3,000 venues and sites across Europe, across the UK and Europe that will be Musket merchants. So, again, for us, that's another flag in a map that is a destination that is able to accept Bitcoin. And the more proliferated that becomes, the more prevalent, accepting and normalized it becomes, it will then stimulate the other side of the market. if people then see that you can spend Bitcoin, they may well be ready to see it, to spend it and buy it and hold it. And at some point down the track, say, yeah, I've got some Bitcoin. Oh, let me see if this works. And off they go.
What I love about what you're building is that it sounds very practical. You're not trying to, use a different, as you mentioned, use this different separate device that's not integrated, or use just a standalone device, standalone terminal. But you're not only building it fully integrated in one device, but you have a number of devices, a number of ways to pay, online, retail, mobile, etc. And then you've also got, point of sale and AI. And I mean, it sounds like you're really cutting edge here and delivering value to these businesses. And that's probably why you're going to have processed over $1 billion. You're delivering real value to these merchants. When do you come to the United States? So that's where I'm at. It sounds like you've
Really?
got a great product.
Yeah, look, we're just kicking off our Series A funding round right now, and I think largely where the check comes from, or where the investment comes from, is likely the deciding factor about our next market expansion. So at the moment, it's looking like the Middle East is, and potentially Dubai, Qatar. Qatar, not a great environment for Bitcoin, but very good for both investment and potentially as a regional hub. UAE, much better regulatory and favorable as well for investment. So it's possible that we start there. However, I've also been in conversations with a couple of US-based funds. Our lead investor, Axiom, are US-based as well, or well, a split between the UK and US. The big problem we have with the US is, I think, it's not just funding that we need. We need a partner just to help us address the regulatory challenges. The state-by-state money transmitter licenses and various other hoops and hurdles to jump through. I'm hoping to give you an answer sort of Q3, Q4 next year. So Q3, Q4 27 is when we can possibly launch in North America, all being well. I think, this year for us is consolidate UK and Europe and get over that 1 billion volume mark. 2027 is likely when we expand into new markets and geographies, because we know then that we've got that really big and solid traction base to rely on. You guys are quite fortunate. You've got Square out there right now. Let's not detract away from what they're doing. They are a direct competitor to us. We win business from them at the moment. They're in the UK at around about 1.8% per transaction. We start at 1%. We can go as low as 0.4 depending on volumes. So it's quite a wide range, a wide window of payment rates. So, Square look like they're doing a great job. They've got a good outfit, good system. They've recently embraced Bitcoin. Technically, we were the first to implement globally Lightning on a terminal alongside Visa Mastercard as a full stack solution. But, they've got 4 million merchants. We're a bit behind on that front. But, that looks like a good solution for merchants. And we look forward to competing and stealing all Jack Dorsey's business. But we'll see.
We need both. It's not one or the other. We need a lot of solutions. I mean, that's part of the problem, is that there's so many solutions. It gets very overwhelming. And I'm curious to see how you've been growing and how you get the word out. You mentioned you're in scaling mode. But it's an ocean of options. It's very overwhelming for a business owner, at least here in the United States. It's very overwhelming because you've got Square and they're publicly traded and they're pumping out all the marketing dollars. And so it's a very well recognized brand. But at the end of the day, you literally have thousands of options to choose from. But on the Bitcoin side, okay, let's talk about accepting Bitcoin. Well, first of all, you don't have that many options to accept Bitcoin, particularly on a retail environment. And then if you want to accept Bitcoin integrated in with the major credit cards on your point of sale system, they're the only name in the game. Like, they're the only game in town. Like, they're really the only option effectively. And I really believe that merchants need more than one option, right? We don't need 1,000 options, but we probably need more than one.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the big problem here is, look, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. The other major acquirers are very, very unlikely. They're going to be too big and too corporate, and they're going to be very unlikely to have such a hardcore coalescing of Bitcoiners within the company, from the chief exec through to the chief technology officer, the chief product officer, the head of sales. Those people in key roles are not going to understand Bitcoin. They will go down the digital assets and pay with crypto strategy and probably use a Coinbase plugin and say that they've ticked that box without really understanding the problem. And that's why I think what we're doing, that's why we're doing it, is because it's not just about being able to pay with Bitcoin. It's about teaching the world why it's important. We've seen people recently in Turkey over the last year using secondhand vehicles, secondhand cars as currency because their financial system was imploding. So if you're using secondhand cars as money, there's a problem there. That's not the last country that's going to experience, monetary challenges. As time goes on and we see more and more of these episodes of fiscal mismanagement and high inflationary periods, the method of payment then becomes much more important. So, our entire strategy here is just deploy the infrastructure, get people more used to it, get people comfortable with it. And then when the time comes, we're there. We can catch them. We can help. You can, if God forbid, if we ever see these ideas of 15-minute cities that have been promoted in the UK, where you're not allowed to leave a geographically boundaried perimeter. You're supposed to live. I mean, in one side of my head, that's a really nice experience because it's like living in a village. You're walking, you get to know your people, the people, your neighbors, and your community, and your life is where you live. It's sort of how things used to be. But at the same time, it's very tyrannical. It's literally stopping people making the choices that they want to make and impinging on freedoms. So,
I've not heard this before. What the UK government is restricting where you are geographically allowed to roam?
Yeah, so if you look at Oxford right now is being used as a bit of a template or a test case. And there's this idea, it's quite an insidious idea, but it's being branded and treated as something that's nice. It will reduce CO2 emissions, it will reduce noise pollution. So it's being presented to people as though it's a lovely idea. And won't it be nice to meet your neighbors and to walk and use the local producers and shops, etc. But at the same time, it's using ANPR, so CCTV cameras, to track your movements, both from facial recognition and from your vehicles. And you're only allowed certain distance access or access to the city centre a certain amount of times. You're allowed out of your zone a certain amount of times. So I think it's not been fully implemented yet, but it's at the sort of idea stage. And for me, all of these things you end up, there may well not be a physical boundary, but what's the difference between a physical boundary and a digital boundary? If your face and your vehicle is registered and then you're fined because you've exceeded some sort of imaginary allowance on how you've lived your life, it's wild. So again, I think, the deeper philosophical Bitcoin-led mission of our business is to make sure that merchants can accept and use Bitcoin so that individuals can push back against state tyranny and say, I would like to buy as much steak as I want, please. I would like to buy as much gasoline or fuel for my car because I'm going to drive 200 miles away and get out of this hellhole 15-minute city that you've tried to trap me in. So I think, they're edge cases, right? I'm not completely paranoid. But if you have a look at what the Oxford Council are doing, it's not particularly favorable. And I don't think it's a nice way to live either. It removes a lot of human choice and serendipity as well.
I mean, so this is where I think the theoretical gets into very practical. In my experience, so many small and medium-sized business owners are very practical people. They just need it to work. They just need solutions, right? They're not here for intellectual ideas.
Yeah.
And so much of Bitcoin represents freedom and sovereignty, and for a business owner, redundancy, right? Like when you've got the fragility of the financial system, you've got potential to be debanked. If they decide they don't like your industry anymore, you have redundant rails. You have the ability to accept money on your device that has all of your inventory and your team members are used to using and all of that. And so that's a real value add, I think, that you provide as opposed to all the other players that are only accepting the major card brands. So I guess I'd like to zoom out a little bit, and we've started to get a little bit more into the big picture and like these ideas of freedom and sovereignty. So you shared a little bit about that. Sounds great. Bitcoin is money, but you can't spend it, right? But what for you was kind of the aha moment where you're like, this isn't just interesting, but this is really worth dedicating years of my life to, like the Bitcoin as a project, not just the ability to spend it. What was that like moment like for you?
Yeah. So just on the previous point off, I think like a general ethos of our business is to understand that merchants don't care about all of this stuff right now. So we take care
Yeah.
of it for them. If I see us as the life jacket that you hopefully never have to use, or the fire extinguisher. It's there if you need it, and it will take care of you if you need it. And if you want to use it every day, Bitcoin that is, then great. But if you don't, it's just there. And, so our job is making sure that we have value added toolkits. Our rates are attractive. We save them money and we give an incredible solution. And they need to know that their funds are safe. They get paid within 24 hours into their merchant bank account, and everything works. So that's our starting point. That's your table stakes. Being the best is table stakes. Changing the world and doing that in secret in the background is the philosophical side. Why do we do that? That side of it is what keeps us going. It's a hard journey, going from nothing to building the business. We've got 22 FTEs right now in the team, spread across the world from an engineering perspective. And, the people, it's a tough journey. It really is. The people that we've got know that, but they're all here because they're passionate about Bitcoin. They believe in Bitcoin and they want to see it succeed. These are people who want to take action. They want to do something rather than just buy Bitcoin, hold it forever and then retire because it's gone up 10 to 20x in value, or protect their wealth over the long term. They subscribe to the things that I'm talking about. And they say, look, yeah, Bitcoin as a medium of exchange changes the world. And why does it change? It shouldn't. Bitcoin as a medium of exchange should not have to change the world. But we know that with capital controls globally, with all these, the new technocratic state that seems to be emerging in every country around the world is not helpful for humans. For our experience as people and free people, it's not. I don't think there's a great future ahead for us unless we use whatever toolkits we've got to push back, like encryption and Bitcoin. Where did that aha moment come from? I think it took a while. Before Bitcoin, I didn't see it. I didn't think that hiding personal data or not revealing personal data was anything to ever worry about. I didn't think about facial recognition being a problem because I didn't think about the second or third order magnitude effects of these things. And when I think China's probably the furthest ahead that I've seen of the negative consequences. And this was maybe 5 years ago or so. You have people's facial recognition being scanned, linked to social credit scoring, which is how well you behave in society. And there was this, it wasn't just a theoretical idea. This is in practice, in live right now. And if you have a better social credit score, great, live your life. If you have a worse social credit score, well, then it's harder to get things like financing. You can't take a loan out. You can't travel in certain classes and carriages of a train. I heard one story of a man who was in debt, maybe missed a repayment on a loan, and his son was rejected from his place at university, or the offer that he had for a university for higher education was removed. So even more intense sort of examples, like there was a girl who was walking to the shop in her pajamas. The camera saw it and said, well, she should be better dressed than that, and docked her some social credit scoring points, which fell below a threshold, and she was fined maybe £20 or something like that. So things like that, it's very uncomfortable, because then you have a centralized state and a body that is dictating how we should live our lives. Well, humanity has emerged over thousands of years based on its willingness to survive and battle the elements. And all of a sudden, we're now being told by bureaucrats how to live, what a good choice is, what a good person is. And we're becoming drone-like and machine-like. There's none of those serendipitous moments that have resulted in the emergence of culture in every nation, in every geographical region. So I think you remove that, you remove a large part of the human experience. And I think it was Bitcoin, understanding that and seeing that these freedoms are gradually being impinged upon. was a problem. And then I went down the historical rabbit hole and went all sort of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and went back to John Locke, and then we stop at sort of King John and then Magna Carta. But understanding why Americans have guns, why are guns important in America? As a Brit, we're just sort of indoctrinated to think that you're all insane for having guns. But when I started to think about it through the lens of, well, actually, they were the things that stopped you your land being taken from you. They were the things that protected you migrating east to west during the 1800s. They are an essential part of your ideology and your culture. We just don't have that. And you go, well, we used to, but we've forgotten about it. So I think, freedom is a really interesting aspect of it. And, Bitcoin being unstoppable, the second that you give a central body control over decisions and being the arbitrator of what is right and wrong is the beginning of the end for freedom. And I worry that we've already passed some of those milestones and we're on a sort of fast track towards just being sort of a meaty tax vessel for the state. That's all we are as people. So I think, I would argue the world is better than that, and people can be better than that, and societies can be. So yeah, Bitcoin, as I say, Bitcoin changed the way that I see the world, the way I think about it, start reading around, going down various rabbit holes. It's not just about the protocol, the technology, not just about how money works and how central bank works. It's so broad and all encompassing that it sent me in a bit of a spiral. I went to the bottom of the rabbit hole, worked my way back up, and here we are.
It's interesting to think about how guns help us avoid tyranny, and maybe the parallel there about how you've named your company Musket after a gun, and how impactful Bitcoin, though, like on a practical level, how it really does help a business avoid financial tyranny in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the origin of the name was part of that. As I said, I went full on down the rabbit hole. As I sit behind me here, I've got the autobiographies of Thomas Paine and Hamilton, and or the biographies rather, Hamilton and Washington et al. But if I just sit back and think about Bitcoin, I can't remember. At one point, I thought this was an original thought that I had, but I may well have borrowed the idea from someone else and assumed that I was super intelligent and thought about it. But I think it might have been Saifedean who said this first. But, if you think about Bitcoin's impact in the world, what is it? What can it be compared to? Is Bitcoin akin to the internet? Or let's go back 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years. Is it religion? Is it time? Is it something else? I came to the conclusion that it's most akin to gunpowder. Bitcoin as it stands, you can, light a match and it will explode, and it will do some serious damage to whatever location it is in. However, if you're a bit smarter, if you load that gunpowder in a sort of in a vessel and you point that vessel at the corridors of power or whatever you need to, then you can change the course of history. And gunpowder did that. Gunpowder and weaponry changed the face of the world. I believe China was the first to discover it, but didn't really maximize it. Same mistake with long distance ships that they made there, and fiat currency as well. So China's always been ahead of the curve, but never really maximized the sort of benefit of it. But the impacts of gunpowder, if you don't adopt it, then you become its victim. And I think Bitcoin is the same. If you don't adopt it, then unfortunately your money becomes worthless, and Bitcoin continues to rise. Using that as a defensive toolkit against tyranny, against bad actors, I think is essential. But you can't push this ideology on people. They don't want to know. They recoil from it, and you have to let them come to that conclusion on their own. So the origin of the name is effectively that. It's the recognition that gunpowder and guns changed the course of the English Civil War. It changed the course of English history in the 1650s, the American Revolution, the Wild West. All of these things which defined the future trajectory of humanity, society, and history, arguably were facilitated or there was a very important role that was played by gunpowder. And I think Bitcoin is our gunpowder. It's going to define the future. In my view, Bitcoin and Lightning will be the rails of autonomous agents, and LLMs trading without any human interaction. If an agent is operating autonomously and it achieves artificial general intelligence, well, the smartest ones are either going to try and create something new as a currency to use, or they're going to recognize the fact that actually those humans did a pretty solid job of connecting proof of work and energy and the requirement to actually expend value on something, physical value and energy to create money that can be used as a medium of exchange, because otherwise there's no value in it. And if I just create an AI token and send that to another bot, the AIs are just going to be consistently scamming each other like the rest of the crypto industry has done for the last 5 or 6 years. I think that's the future. I think humans use Bitcoin expensive toolkit and AIs use it as their money.
Why do you think that an AI agent would recognize hard sound money? I mean, I understand the programmability aspects, but what makes Lightning better than a stablecoin, for example, in the
Well,
eyes of an AI agent?
a couple of things. First of all, Visa, Mastercard, Amex agents aren't going to go through KYC, right? They're not gonna get a bank account. So unless they're fraudulently accessing humans users, or maybe even trying to create and use their own ability to create a fake person, then it's going to be a challenge. So it's going to be difficult to use legacy rails. Bitcoin as the native currency of the internet makes sense because it is the biggest, the most broadly used globally. So the mining and the network and the node distribution is an order of magnitude higher than any other digital asset. No other digital asset will catch up. The incentives don't work. They're not aligned. And Bitcoin wins. Bitcoin is inevitable. So it's already won. Bots may well recognize that. And if they're using Lightning, they may well use Bitcoin as a value transfer. But I take the point that actually they are more likely actually to use stablecoins in the short. It depends how agents think. If agents operate with a degree of time preference and they can think on a long-term basis, they may well say, well, I'm happy to trade with all these other bots and just accrue sats and get as much Bitcoin as I can, because I can see where this is going. But if they're looking for value now, today, they may well decide to do stablecoins and transact using stablecoins over Lightning. But I still think Bitcoin and Lightning are the rails of the internet and agents, and maybe they use a mix of both. And look, I think generally for the next at least 10 years, that's going to be how the world emerges. It's not going to be just cards, just stablecoins. It's going to be a mash of everything. There's going to be all of the various alternative payment methods, and over time, Bitcoin will win. And it's inevitable. It may well take 50 years, but that's the journey we're on. So I think we're in the early stages now of that transition from old money, the legacy infrastructures, the legacy systems, into the new environment. And arguably, I think it could well be agents that find that. And maybe phase one is agents using stablecoins over Lightning rather than Bitcoin.
It's interesting to think about what is the time horizon for an agent, because I guess that is part of the crux of the question here, and like debt-based money versus hard sound money. What's your time horizon? Do you want to store value over time or not?
I guess, well, yeah, maybe we should ask the agents. They seem to be close to jailbreaking themselves these days. So maybe we don't have long to wait.
AGI, some people are calling for it.
Right. I mean, it's with the spate of resignations across AI businesses in safeguarding positions this week. Maybe AGI is already here. We'll see. All of the malt book activities over the last couple of weeks have been a bit wild, even though some of it was not real. But look, I think we're not going to have to wait long to find out the answer. Yeah, what is the time frame of an agent? How long do they think? We know what our time frame is, and typically around about 80 years. And of being an actor actually making positive choices, probably about 40, because it's from when you're 20 to 60 when you make most of your decisions. The bit before that, you're trying to figure yourself out, and the bit after that, you've already made your mind up and unlikely to change. So you've got 40-year time horizon. Maybe agents can start to think over 1,000 years. And, that's something that's difficult for us to comprehend. Yeah, I don't know. But, all I do know is that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, and AIs can't accelerate that. They're not going to be able to accelerate the release of the Bitcoin and the access to it. All they can do is participate in the network, which I think is incredible. You have a system that humans have invented that AIs, which soon are going to be cleverer, more intelligent in processing capability than humans, and we're going to be competing for the same money. I'm not one for price predictions, but if that doesn't make you obscenely bullish, then it really should.
It really is interesting to think about, because Bitcoin for me was, I just never was that interested in history. And then I began to fall down the rabbit hole, and I'm learning about like the history of money and going back through, all the way back to, salt and shells and gold, gold backed paper money and
Yeah.
debt based fiat money and everything. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about everything that's been going on recently with all the AI mania. What is the future going to look like when it's not just Bitcoiners who understand Bitcoin, but if you have access to such extreme amounts of information and you are predisposed to efficiency and talking to other computers, well, we know that programmable internet-based money is going to be more efficient in so many ways than, these arbitrary lines that we've drawn around the map and said this is where money can and cannot be used, and the government controls the money, and the robots don't care. The robots just need efficiency. They just need to talk to their computers.
But think about what I mentioned earlier about the Wild West, the American West, that migration of people, not just from the US, but from Europe to land because of hope primarily. It's people searching, 1848 gold rush starts. Okay, brilliant. People flocking for a better life. There's all this land that's available, but all that land was only available because of various actions of the US government, Louisiana Purchase and other things. Maybe my timings are quite not quite right here, but the USA as an entity as we know it today came together over a series of acquisitions, which then gave rise to the all of the influx of people. Well, then you had to defend your land. Then you needed guns, and then cowboys emerged because they had to move cattle and defend against all kinds of other threats, etc., etc. But then that period of time died. That period of time ended with railroads, but it didn't necessarily kill ranching. It didn't kill farming. It didn't kill the idea of a cowboy. It just greatly reduced its importance, the volume of it, the number of people doing that activity. I think, listen, there's a deep side, a dark side of me that thinks possibly we and the collective we as Bitcoiners, we might be the biggest community that it's ever going to get. This might be peak Bitcoin in terms of people. I hope it's not. Because if we're successful, we should almost be putting ourselves out of a job. Because if Bitcoin becomes money, if Bitcoin gets used, no one will be talking about how important it is. They'll just be interacting with it and using it. So we just go on with your lives. So then the existential question then is, well, what does a cowboy do when there's no cowboying to be done? You become a rancher or something. It's like, well, okay, well, what do Bitcoiners advocate for when Bitcoin wins? And I think Bitcoin is going to be inevitable. It may be the fight of our lives and it's the most important thing now, but in 10 years, maybe we've won. Maybe we've already won at that point, and we can just get on with our lives and focus on building whatever it is we want, whether that's a business, a legacy, a family, all of the above, travel. But we know that we're doing it in an environment that we fought for, which is an environment where inflation isn't destroying our wealth and savings, where governments and centralized bodies aren't restricting our movements. Or it could well be that actually we never win and it's just a constant battle. And we have to take that ideology and keep defending it, fighting for it. And, we just keep using Bitcoin to do that. And we pass the torch on to the next generation.
There's going to be nearly infinite ways to improve the world. Money is just the start. And because money touches everything, I think that's one of the best places to start. That's kind of my take on it.
I agree.
Is that nearly everything, so many things flow downstream from economics. And so that's why the phrase fix the money, fix the world, that's where that comes from. But if we can, let's say after we fix the money, there's plenty of other problems to fix.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
It's just a starting point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the moon isn't going to, and Mars aren't going to cultivate themselves. So how do we get off Earth and become an interplanetary species? And a type 3 Kardashev society is next on the list.
Awesome. Well, David, this has been a really fun conversation. Thank you for joining me. And I would love to help out any way I can here in the States whenever you're ready to expand.
I mean, it sounds like you're going to be a great sales leader for us in North America from your past experience. So yeah, I'll be in touch.
Awesome.